Hello class, welcome to our next class on Chicano history, where we will be covering the Chicano civil rights movement. The Chicano civil rights movement has often been overlooked, and Chicanos have not been given full credit for their participation in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. However, Chicanos played a large part in the civil rights movement through various forms of activism, such as student-led walkouts and protests, boycotts, and other movements. The Chicano movement is also known as the Brown Power movement. The Chicano movement has been used by historians to describe a moment of ethnic empowerment and protest among Americans of Mexican descent beginning in the 1960s. The Mexican American civil rights movement encompassed a broad cross-section of issues, from restoration of land grants to farm workers' rights to enhanced education to voting and political rights. They fought against discrimination and unequal opportunities. A youth movement represented in the struggle against discrimination in schools and the anti-war movement. The farm workers' movement, the movement for political empowerment, most notably in the formation of La Raza Unida Party, and the struggle for control and ownership over homelands in the U.S. Southwest, were all part of the Chicano civil rights movement. Chicanos became very empowered during the civil rights movement and fought vigorously against many social inequalities against Mexican Americans in the United States, as well as social inequalities against other people, more specifically minorities in the United States. It encompassed a broad cross-section of issues, from restoration of land grants to farm workers' rights to enhanced education to voting and political rights, as well as emerging awareness of collective history. Socially, the Chicano movement addressed negative ethnic stereotypes of Mexicans in mass media and the American consciousness. Many Chicanos and Chicanas campaigned against discrimination, racism, and exploitation. The Chicano movement that culminated in the early 1970s or 1960s took inspiration from heroes and heroines from their indigenous Mexican and American past. The term Chicano had long existed as a discriminatory term among young Mexican Americans prior to this period. By the 1960s, however, young Mexican Americans embraced the label, reinscribing it with notions of pride in one's Mexican heritage, and defiance against institutions and individuals who practiced or condemned discrimination against Mexicans. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta played an important part in the Chicano civil rights movement. They fought for farm workers' rights. In 1962, Cesar Chavez founded the National Farm Workers Association, later to become the United Farm Workers. Cesar Chavez was a prominent union leader and labor organizer. He stressed nonviolent methods and drew attention for his causes via boycotts, marches, and hunger strikes. Throughout his activism, Cesar Chavez was able to secure raises and improve conditions for farm workers in California, Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Dolores Huerta is an activist and labor leader who co-founded what would become the United Farm Workers. She worked alongside Cesar Chavez to fight for farm workers' rights. Dolores Huerta has worked to improve social and economic conditions for farm workers and to fight discrimination. For more than a century, farm workers had been denied a decent life in the fields and communities of California's agricultural valleys. Essential to the state's biggest industry, but not but only so long as they remained exploited and submissive farm workers. The Bracero program, an informal arrangement between the United States and Mexican governments, was a program to provide Mexican agricultural workers to growers. The conditions for farm workers were harsh. Grape pickers in 1965 were making an average of 90 cents per hour plus 10 cents per basket picked. State laws regarding working standards were simply ignored by the growers. The United Farm Workers movement was led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. It was a demand for better wages and better conditions for the farm workers. Workers worked tough hours for little money that was not enough to support their families. The most successful event of the movement was the Delano grape strike of 1965, where Filipino and Mexican farm workers united to go on strike to demand increase in wages. About 5,000 grape workers walked off their job, and they urged people to boycott grapes. The Chicano civil rights movement of the 1960s galvanized itself around the issue of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the unjust seizure of Mexican land grants. These efforts to restore land grants in New Mexico to the descendants of their Spanish colonial and Mexican descendants became known as the Chicano land grant movement. The leader of this movement was Reyes Tijerina. The signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1948 by the United States and Mexico marked the end of the Mexican-American War. Through the treaty, Mexico conceded a large part of its territory to the U.S., which included New Mexico. Mexican citizens had the option to become U.S. citizens or to relocate into Mexican territory. Several offices and courts were appointed to oversee the confirmation of the Mexican citizens' land grants in the new U.S. territory. Because the court had strict and almost unattainable requirements, only about 6% of the land grants claimed by Mexican citizens were recognized. In this way, Mexican citizens were stripped of their property rights and land. In the mid-60s, a group of New Mexican citizens organized to fight for the rights to their lands their ancestors had lost. Reyes Lopez Tijerina was the leader of this movement. In 1966, frustrated with the government's lack of a response to his appeals, he led the occupation of the Echo Amphitheater, which was within the Pueblo's land grant, and asserted their right to the land. This incident marked the beginning of Tijerina's legal troubles, and the state tried for years to send him to jail, finally succeeding in 1970. Released in 1971, his incarceration had already made him a symbol of political repression in the United States, and he continued to speak out against the crimes of the government. Tijerina preached a message of unity for Chicanos, while also working with black militiants and other activists throughout the United States. He has become one of the most well-known and dedicated leaders of the Chicano movement. The 1969 National Youth and Liberation Conference was a pivotal point for the Chicano movement. It was held in Denver, led by Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. Approximately 1,500 Mexican-American youths from throughout the United States attended the conference held at the Crusade for Justice. At the conference, there was discussion of common issues of oppression, discrimination, and injustice. The conference formulated a philosophy of cultural nationalism, calling for all Mexican Americans to unite under the banner of the term Chicano and calling for self-determination in all spheres of life. The conference participation looked to the past of their indigenous ancestors and discovered that the Aztecs who had settled in the Valley of Mexico and created the Aztec Empire had originated somewhere in the southwestern United States in a place called Aztlán. The youthful activism embraced the concept of Aztlán as their spiritual homeland and hammered out el plan espiritual de Aztlán as the common denominator for mass mobilization and organization. This was the first time on such a large scale that a generation of Mexican American youth met to discuss common issues of oppression, discrimination, and injustice. After much debate and discussion, the conference formulated a philosophy of cultural nationalism. It was a moment of empowerment for Chicano youth to stand up for their rights. In the years that followed, the term Chicano and Aztlán spread throughout the Southwest as they became incorporated into the names of Mexican American civil rights, educational, political, cultural, and artistic organizations. Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez was the founder of the civil rights organization Crusade for Justice. He led protests in the 60s that made Denver the focal point of Chicano activism. He fought for Chicano unity and against racism and police brutality. The spiritual plan of Aztlán, or the Plan Espiritual de Aztlán, was the Chicano Movement Manifesto. It was adopted by the First National Chicano Liberation Youth Conference in March of 1969. In the spirit of a new people that is conscious not only of its proud historical heritage, but also of the brutal gringo invasion of our territories, we the Chicano inhabitants and civilizers of the northern land of Aztlán, from whence came our forefathers, reclaiming the land of their birth and consecrating the determination of our people of the sun, declare that the call of our blood is our power, our responsibility, and our inevitable destiny. This passage of the plan emphasized the importance of indigenous culture in the Chicano empowerment. The plan claimed that Chicanos are free and sovereign to determine those tasks which are justly called for by their house, their land, the sweat of their brows, and by their hearts. As land belongs to those who plant the seeds, water the fields, and gather the crops, and not to the foreign Europeans, we do not recognize capricious frontiers on the bronze continent. The plan also claimed, brotherhood unites us, and love for our brothers makes us a people whose time has come and who struggles against the foreigners, gabacho, who exploits our riches and destroys our culture. With our heart in our hands and our hands in the soil, we declare the independence of our mestizo nation. We are a bronze people with a bronze culture. Before the world, before all of North America, before all our brothers in the bronze continent, we are a nation. We are a union of free pueblos. We are Aztlán. The plan was a major source of empowerment during the Chicano civil rights movement. It was an effort to reclaim their traditional cultures and traditions that were wrongfully robbed from them during the Spanish conquest. In late 1967, East Los Angeles housed a school system entrenched in racism. The Mexican American community had the highest high school dropout rate and lowest college attendance among any ethnic group. The poor facilities and constant underestimation of student capabilities by teachers created an atmosphere hostile to learning. The oppressive conditions, coupled with the inability to make changes, compelled students, activists, and teachers to meet and discuss the situation. They decided that making their plight public was the best way to pressure the school board into compliance with their demands for education reform. Teachers saw Castro, along with student leaders such as Paula Cristosomo, college students, and groups such as United Mexican American Students and the Brown Berets developed 36 demands to the Board of Education. These goals included bilingual, bicultural education, Latino teachers and administrators, smaller class sizes, better facilities, and the revision of textbooks to include Mexican American history. Their needs were not met, and so the students threatened walkouts, which they called blowouts. Los Angeles public schools are paid based on the number of students in class each day. By walking out of the homeroom before attendance was taken, the students could target the schools financially. Students established blowout committees at Roosevelt, Lincoln, and Garfield high schools, plus a central coordinating committee. Their meetings were almost always infiltrated by plainclothes policemen. On March 5th, 2,000 students walked out of Garfield High. They were met by policemen and an angry administration. The next day, 2,700 students walked out carrying leaflets on education reform. They continued to walk out on the 7th and the 8th. As planned, Roosevelt High School walked out next on March 6th. The principal locked the gate, but determined students climbed over the fence, only to be met by police, who beat the students. After walking out March 8th and the 10th through the 15th, 10 through to 15,000 students from the main 5 East LA schools, adding Lincoln and Jefferson, held a 9 a.m. rally at Hazard Park. They carried signs reading Chicano Power and Viva la Raza. After a week of protests, the LA Board of Education set a meeting for March 11th. Chicano students, parents, professors, and community members formed the Educational Issues Coordinating Committee as their representative voice. At the meeting, the EICC asked for amnesty for all students involved in the walkouts, as well as a community meeting to discuss the needed education reform. The board agreed and the students returned to school. 1,200 people attended the community meeting held at Lincoln High on March 28th. The EICC presented the original 36 demands. Although the board claimed to agree with the needed changes, they cited a lack of funds to follow through. This prompted the students to walk out of the meeting. On March 31st, 13 of the walkout organizers were arrested for conspiracy to disturb schools and the peace, a felony charge. Included in the LA 13 were Sal Castro and the students. Although most of the demands were not met, the walkouts unified and empowered the Chicano community, which in the process became a political force. La Raza Unida Party was formed in Crystal City, Texas in 1970 by Jose Angel Gutierrez. It attempted to institutionalize Chicano students in national political terms and on a nationwide basis. Crystal City was 80% Mexican American, but they had no representation in the city council or on the school board. They organized a boycott against the school through walkouts. Through student walkouts at school, the adults in the Chicano communities were reached. On April 4th, 1970, 4 Chicanos from La Raza Unida Party were elected to the school board. Because of the success of La Raza Unida Party in Crystal City, many other cities and states in the southwest United States organized their own branches of the party. The Mexican American Civil Rights Movement is one of the least studied social movements of the 1960s. However, the movement shows us the sense of the growing unrest of the Mexican American population. We witness the emerging awareness of collective history, the power of mass action, and the evolution of the Chicano movement. The movement can be broken down into 4 components: the quest for a homeland, as seen in the Chicano land grant movement, the struggle in the fields, as seen in the United Farmer Group movement, taking back the schools, as seen in the East LA blowouts movement, and fighting for political power, as seen in the formation of La Raza Unida Party. as a third-party force for political power and the importance of political rights.